everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk, sponsored by Darley and Inglis. My name's Bren O'Brien, and joining me as always is Tim Rowe. Today we have a look back at the Melbourne Premier Sale and ponder what is behind the current strength of the Australian bloodstock market. We also look at who is the best young talent in Australia and a possible export levy out of New Zealand. In racing, Racing New South Wales proves its returns to owners, Racing Australia's long-awaited fact book, and who will be the big winners and losers from this week's Group 1 racing. And in wagering, the move towards the national tote and the crackdown on social media influencers. Tim, we were in Melbourne over the weekend. It was a highly successful sale, more than $8 million spent than last year, average up 5%, clearance very strong. The bloodstock world goes on. The rest of the world might be in absolute chaos at the moment, Tim, but when it comes to the bloodstock world, it lives in its own little world, doesn't it? And English will be highly pleased with the results, but also it just shows you how healthy and confident the industry is at the moment.
There's the old theory that the bloodstock market's sort of 18 months behind what's happens economically, or the share market and things like that. So, but yeah, it was strong, and I think it fed off last year's great sale where there was a lot of Asian participation. And I know Sebastian Hutch keeps referencing Nicky Wong, but it's not just Nicky. There's the whole English team really putting a lot of effort to getting a buying bench last year, and then the horses or the vendors sort of follow, going, gee, that was a great sale. I'll sell my nice colt that could go to Easter, or probably Magic Millions on January. I'll go to Premier. And placement of horses and yearlings is, as important as finding the right race. Where what was, it was a fantastic Premier sale. But what was interesting on the bus is, Bren, we get the bus out from Crown, not that we're staying at Crown Towers, but near there, we catch the bus from there. That, you speak to a lot of industry people, and it's about expectations. And, the book two at Magic Million, someone said, we had a great sale. We took horses up there sort of going against the grain, perhaps sort of doing opposite what to most people. And it's about expectations on your horse. People would have taken really nice horses to Premier and mostly got rewarded. And I'm sure there was, like any sale, some were a little bit disappointed, but overall, really strong market, depth of buying bench. Without, I know the Newgate China Horse Club bought a couple, I think, but it wasn't dominated by one buyer. And Yearlong, for instance, were selling rather than buying, so mostly. So, it was overall a strong sale.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, they've done a great job with this Melbourne sale, to be fair, and probably the last couple of years have been success. So there is some local factors there, as you spoke about, Tim, and, their strength of getting those buyers there and all that sort of stuff. But there's a broader sense of positivity as well. I know that Sebastian's very keen to point out that the first sale of the year went down, as he keeps on pointing back to us a lot. But I still think that Magic Millions would have been very pleased with how that worked out, given they had fewer horses and the way things sit. But I think overall, you sit there and you take a temperature test going into Gold Coast March, Adelaide, and Easter, and the yearling market in Australia is in pretty rude health. In fact, it's in better health than it was last year, probably better health than it was 2 years ago, and only really behind those sort of peak years of 22, 23 in terms of where things sit.
I think that the owners, or the trainers in particular, are just so bold, prepared to take risks, because you talk to them, it's really hard to sell down horses, but they keep buying because they, I guess it's the biggest stables in particular, or any trainer, if you don't have horses, you can't train winners. And if you're still paying rent on boxes, it's, quick way to the poorhouse. So they've got to back themselves to be able to sell horses. And I guess, it is a discretionary spend owning racehorses. There's still a lot of money out there, and there's nothing better than owning a winner and a good horse. And there's some good horses around at the moment. I think that inspires people to get, reinvest or go, I want to be part of that. And, that'll continue it, certainly at the Easter sale, and hopefully for Magic Millions' point of view, was the cutest, now open sale at the Gold Coast and Adelaide as well, which, it is. We'll have more of that lower end of the market, which is tougher, but it'll be interesting to see how strong it is.
Yeah, and obviously you spoke to Sebastian after the sale on Monday, so it was ahead of book two, but nevertheless he was sort of able to reflect upon the strength of the first 2 days of the sale and point to sort of the overall parts of the market which he thinks are sort of driving this confidence at the moment.
Well, we spend 12 months a year trying to develop buyers, canvas buyers, and I feel like we're good at it, like we're motivated to do well, because if we can generate a good buying bench for each sale, that gives vendors confidence. If vendors are confident in what we're doing, we get better horses. I certainly think that was the platform for the sale going better this year. We had better horses, and that gave the buying bench a bit more impetus. But to be at the end of day 2 and for the gross to have exceeded the gross figure for the end of day 3 last year already is really pleasing. Like we've put a significant amount more. Like I think the gross up over 8 million year on year, the equivalent stage. I feel that's a good effort, testament to the quality of horse the vendors gave us to sell. Clearance rates up. It's not at the level we'd like it to be, but it's up on prior year. Median is up, average is up. We're confident running a good sale, and it's. I think it's fair to say it's played out probably even better than what we expected.
Where have those so-called good horses come from? They come from that would have been sold at other sales, or can we read into it that the quality of the Victorian bred horses, for instance, has improved? I'm not saying Rick Jamieson had great drives for a long time, but Ross Ferris, as we mentioned yesterday, that maybe the local stock is better. Would you say?
I think it's a combination of factors. If you take Rick Jamieson and Kelly Skilcone Gilguy as an example, they're supporting this sale exclusively this year. And last year they were exclusive English supporters, but they had a draft at Easter. This year they're selling exclusively here. And I think that's a contributory factor in the success of the sale. We like more local vendors to see the value in the opportunity that presents. We've seen over the years different vendors exclusively target this sale to great effect. Gilguy are doing that now, and I think there's a case to be made for a number of other vendors to consider doing the same or carefully consider doing the same. But at the same time, there's been a strong cohort of interstate vendors participating in the sale, and they've had good sales. Like they've sold horses well, and I think that's been good for the sale also. So I could really try and digest the mechanics of the sale and the positives and negatives out of the sale once we get a few days post-sale. But at the moment, we sit and reflect on a set of results through book 1 that are, on the whole, very positive, while at the same time not ignorant of the fact that, as I said, a classic, there are parts of the market that are hard. Like there's no pretending, there's no disguising it. Very cognizant of the challenge that breeders and vendors face with particular horses or people participating in certain parts of the market. And, while there are lots of good things, we can reflect over the last 2 days on lots of positive things. A certain amount of our focus will be on how do we make the parts of the market didn't work so well better ahead of next year. And that's the same for Classic, it'll be the same for Premier.
Just sort of more broadly about trainers being able to sell down their horses. Anecdotally, it hasn't got easier. It's might have not necessarily got harder, but it hasn't got easier this year, from what I'm told. But trainers are still going out there and putting their neck on the line, seemingly, and certainly here, as you say, up 8 million and Classic, and there's a lot of money's already flying around the market. That's trainers have to sell down the majority of those.
Yeah, we'll see what the net position is at the end of the yearling sale season. I mean, as I've said a number of times, the first yearling sale of the year was down 5.1 million. So, we'll see where it starts to net out or how it nets out. I think this is a very particular sort of market. It's a very unique market. The Australian market is a very unique one in the context of international bloodstock. You don't go anywhere else in the world and see trainers, syndicators, agents, etc., prepared to go into the market and speculate in the manner that they do here. The auction houses are very supportive of that, very cognizant of it. We try and create an environment that helps people sell their horses. I feel like yesterday in particular, and at stages during lunchtime today, it was very vibrant here. It was an environment that people would have looked at and say, this is an interesting part of the industry that maybe I don't get to experience or don't get to understand. I think it'll be an incentive to people to become more involved or learn more about the industry. We've had a number of different industry groups bring tours through here over the last 2 days. People who are interested in the sport or interested in the side of the industry, wanting to learn more. I think those kind of things are positive. Any step that we can take to grow the ownership base, whether it's people who participate domestically or people overseas who want to participate in their own jurisdiction, or international people want to participate in Australia. We have a mandate to try and grow that ownership base, and we spend the whole year promoting our product with a view to trying to make it easier for agents, trainers, syndicators, etc., to sell English product.
What is also fascinating, and it's pointed to this next story I want to talk to you about, Tim, is like, I guess, how does the racing industry get value out of the strength of what's going on in the bloodstock space? Now, and this is not necessarily a direct correlation with this, but this export levy story that you've written up this morning, Tim. Talk to me about that story. It's sort of basically, it's an idea that's come out of New Zealand that, if New Zealand are going to lose their best horses overseas, that there needs to be a benefit to the New Zealand industry according to that. And, I guess in theory, we sort of see why you would do that, but there probably is a line where you can push it too far. It's a bit like the old Donald Trump tariffs, isn't it? So,
Well, look, at the moment it's $450. Australia charges, all the major jurisdictions have the similar fee. Australia's $550. UK sort of £200 or, roughly sort of equivalent of $500, around that mark, just for horses that are exported out of the country. It's more a fee to cover probably the administration of that with stud books and different things like that. I guess, NZTR have got a whole new executive team over the last sort of 12 months. Matt Balesti and Mitch Lamb, there's general manager of racing, and, Charlotte Mills, who's there as sort of contractor. So they're looking at ways, how can we improve, the bottom line, or just make the industry more efficient? And that's, as Mitch pointed out to me, there's probably 40 things they're looking at and they should be looking at. And one of them is the levy, increasing the levy, because New Zealand is a heavy export market. It's probably not just the good horses, but as we know, like Australia bought 200 horses from the Book One Karaka sale. Hong Kong's a strong market, the Ready to Run sale. All the horses, or majority of the horses, go overseas and are exported. So the industries, or NZTR, was looking at, okay, there's a lot of money going out that we're not really getting a return for, where you can argue some of these horses, the NZTR infrastructure is used to prepare some of these horses, particularly breeze-ups and, off trials and things like that. So maybe we should up the fee and get, and the initial figure was $5,000, and they mightn't think that was a lot of money, but if you're thinking that's passed on to the owner, Australian buyers might go, geez, another $5,000, that's $5,000 less they're going to spend on the horse, or they go, I'll just go buy a horse in Australia. And Hong Kong the same, in particular those smaller markets like Malaysia, Thailand, Korea, go, geez, I'm only spending $25,000. It costs me $20,000 to get the horse to my home country, and then you're going to slap me with another $5,000. It's too hard. So that's the argument on the other side. NZTR, I think, have backed away from $5,000. It'll probably go up slightly, if at all. Maybe goes to $750, and even $1,500 was probably bandied around, might be too high. But as Mitch says, they've got to look at all these things. There is a new executive team there, and they should be examining all those things, and they're taking feedback and consulting, which is important, rather than just saying this is what's happening, because there's a lot of moving parts in the industry, and you can't keep everyone happy, as we know.
Well, it's an interesting one too. I kind of think if they had done it this year, NZTR, because of the difference of the Australian dollar, they probably actually wouldn't have been noticed. Like pretty much, it probably would have leveled most of those horses back up. But if you've got people buying 10 to 12, 15 horses out of New Zealand each year, and even the trade out of New Zealand, and the money that can be made, it's, the reason why people do buy those horses out of New Zealand is, yes, performance, but B, it's price, isn't it, Tim? Like, it's the ability, the fact that you can buy a good group quality horse out of New Zealand at a better price than you can buy one in Australia, because of the nature of the market and the willingness of the Kiwis to trade, and the fact that a horse can only go so far and earn so much prize money in New Zealand. So it's, we talk about the difference between the Australian and New Zealand industry. We talk about the similarities as well, but it's an interesting approach. Like I think it's good that they're canvassing these ideas and talking about them, and if they step back and go, whatever else, this is what happens in politics. You run up the flagpole, see what people happen. If they want to burn the place down, then we go, okay, we've got to probably change our course here. But it's an interesting one from that perspective. So, and I think, we'll watch that one with interest, and I think we'll see probably a few things coming out of New Zealand under NZTR and Matt Palesti's watch. Now he's sort of 12 months into the role. Separately, quickly back to the sales news this week, that the Winx Colt by Snitzel won't sell at Easter. Obviously, a bit of a setback there for Inglis. He would have been an absolute draw card, and Yeah, no doubt drawing a multi-million-dollar price tag and all that sort of stuff. Any insight there to sort of where things are at? Is a major setback, minor setback? What's sort of the expectations there? Will he be retained to race, do you think, Tim?
Everyone's pretty tight-lipped, but my understanding is it's not a major setback. It's, if it was another horse without that pedigree, no one would have noticed. There's the average is, I think, 10 to 15% of every sale catalogue generally is withdrawn for some reason or other. In this case, I'm told it's not because of X-rays or throat abnormality, grade 4 or anything like that. It's just a setback at the wrong time of year. I did sort of suggest whether Magic Millions would put their hand up. Could he get to, we'll sell him at the national sale? I'm told that's, the setback would prevent him being ready for that sale in, early June, late May, early June as well. So, but, he's a late foal. Whether one of the owners sells out and some stay in, as we know, Debbie Capitas bought the first foal, bought out the other owners at a valuation of 10 million. I don't think it'll hold him back. They'll give him time, as I said, and I'm sure he might be sold, but I'd assume he'll end up at Chris Waller's stable at some point and be looked after and hopefully doing something at 3, winning a Randwick Guineas or something like that, and continuing the bloodlines at stud.
Yeah, we're interested to see how that one pans out as well, Tim. The other one I wanted to sort of touch on, we had an article and run the numbers this week. It actually got pretty high engagement, and I'm not saying I'm surprised about that, but it's always good to see when there's an article that gets a bit of love. And there's a run the numbers article around who's the best young Australasian stallion. I put it in there because of the super situation. When you look at those stallions that are, you and I discussed it a lot over a beer and a Palmer over sales time. Tim, which stallion would you send your horse to and all that sort of stuff. Look at those horses whose oldest crop are now sort of 3 or 4. There is a really strong collection of stallions, isn't there? I mean, I think, that if you look at the ones that are currently 4, we're talking Super Seth, Too Darn Hot, Alabama Express and Castle Vecchio. And the ones that are 3, we're talking Gayaf, Bivouac, Ole Kirk, and then you probably had Farnan and Wooten Bassett there as well, albeit that Wooten Bassett obviously no longer with us. But the numbers are fairly strong. Gayaf's obviously been well publicised, for 10% stakes winners to runners so far, only 40 runners in Australia. But if you look at obviously Too Darn Hot we've spoken about a lot, but Alabama Express, Castle Vecchio, Super Seth, obviously now a $70 million stallion. There's some great strength there in that next generation, and I think that'll give a bit of faith to those who probably felt that there was been a bit of a gap, which is probably fair to say, Tim, and probably in the last few years, and the generation of stallions probably 5 to 10 years older than them probably haven't necessarily stepped into the breach left by or likely to be left by the likes of Snitzer Lime, Invincible, Written Tycoon, Not a Single Doubt, Exceeding Excel, Fast Out Rock, these type of horses.
Yeah, we're all waiting for that. They look a promising group. What's probably because of the commercial nature of the industry, it's for those studs. Don't have to tell the nominations teams at the various studs how hard it is to get mares at particularly 3rd, 4th, even 5th season, depending what's going on. So, obviously Gayaf didn't come back last year. Bivouac, I've got great belief in him and think he'll continue on, but he's the numbers sort of plateaued a little bit. Ole Kirk always got good numbers, but again, just whether the momentum drops away, even Too Darn Hot. I know he covered those mares in the Northern Hemisphere to Southern Hemisphere time, but I think it was 60 mares or something compared to probably 100 plus. So sort of a bit of a momentum, drop or could fall away a little bit. But, and Castle Vecchio's got good numbers again, and just it'll be climb who'll rise through the ranks in the next few years and who sort of maybe doesn't go on with it. But at the moment, there's some promising stallions there, which gives all breeders hope.
Yeah, and I think it is a really interesting one. The following segment is brought to you by Darley. Darley sires continue to perform extremely well at the recent English Premier Sale. They featured in 3 of the top 5 lots of the sale, with $750,000 for a Too Darn Hot colt, $625,000 for a filly by Kermadec, and a son of Gayaf securing $520,000. The progeny of Animo, Harry Angel, Street Boss, Pinatubo, and Blue Point were all in strong demand across the Victorian sale. That comes after the progeny of emerging Darley stallions provided the top 2 prizes at English Classic, the top prize at Tasmania, and the 3rd top prize in Perth. By Darley in 2026. In racing, Tim, we got a little notice to participants sent out by Saran Cook, the Racing New South Wales chairman, this during the week, sort of looking at guess, pointing out the virtues of racing your horses in New South Wales off the back of the Race Australia fact book. Before I get into that one, good work for Racing Australia for getting the fact booked out. They're a bit delayed, but a little push along from their good friends at the Straight seemed to have got them through to publish it. We did ask them on Monday where it was. We published a story on Tuesday saying it hadn't been published yet 2 months afterwards. And on Tuesday afternoon, lo and behold, it appears. But we'll leave that one alone for now. And look, I think what Saran Cook is pointing out is about the New South Wales returns to participants. Yeah, you can't argue with the numbers. $420 million, which is $110 million higher than its nearest jurisdiction, Victoria. It does seem a little, I don't know. I mean, parochial is probably the best way to put it. To me, that to be taking a national publication which talks about the health of the broader industry, and you're sort of picking out your state, but that's her prerogative to do that. From your perspective, Tim, like obviously we know about the political challenges in New South Wales. She spoke about the agitators and the people that are self-interest that's perpetuating this notion that New South Wales racing is in trouble. You can't argue with the top line figures, but there probably are a few bits and pieces, a few nuances to this story that are beyond just pure returns to participants.
Well, like people aren't disputing the pie is, they like the pie. It's how the pie is divided up and who's getting how much of the pie. The argument from some of those agitators or people is, and again, I can see both sides to this, is the top end, races are too high and the bottom end are not getting enough, or the spread of, obviously there's some mega stables in New South Wales, good luck to them, that are taking, some would argue, a disproportionate amount of that prize money. And then, which, again, that's like, I assume the Racing New South Wales board debate that, how that should be divided up. And then the other thing is prize money compared to infrastructure. And we'll use Victoria as an example. I think Victoria, most would agree that probably got better training infrastructure than New South Wales. Sydney probably just makes it difficult, obviously, with Randwick and Rose Hill, and as we know, Warwick Farms, financial challenges to upgrade those in a metropolitan area, like urbanised area, whereas Victoria's got Ballarat. They invested in Pakenham heavily. Cranbourne's, a massive training centre with sort of 1,500 horses, I think. So I don't think it can be measured just by prize money levels, because there's the infrastructure, and I'm not saying it's anyone's fault, but necessarily it could be bad luck, coincidence. But Bathurst was been called off sort of mid-meeting twice in the last few weeks. There's been a lot of rain, but Orange was abandoned today. New South Wales has a lot of tracks to upkeep that race a few times, but infrastructure, I think, is probably an undervalued part of that pie that hasn't been distributed accurately. Some would argue that anyway.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is that New South Wales run 25% more races than Victoria. So if you compare them on a, return per race rate, New South Wales is still ahead, 77,000 to 71,000, roughly. So they are still ahead, and I think it's okay for them to, I don't think a problem is sitting there saying, hey, we're doing well with this. But yeah, and there are some other, broader, questions about where things are. The other thing, Tim, and look, the what's the word I'm looking for? The transparency around wagering data. There was no wagering data in the Racing Australia fact book. Now, wagering is, as we know, the overwhelming driver of revenue for the racing industry. So what I will say is that, we need to be able to keep tracking these numbers in terms of the money coming in. We get an overall view from Racing New South Wales on revenue, and that's broken down into certain bits, but the actual wagering aspect and trends are nowhere near as broken down as what they are in Victoria and other states. So in terms of getting a clear view on that, that's probably the thing. And a few of those agitators that she mentioned have sort of bitten back a little bit, I suppose, and said, well, it's great that she's going out here and talking about this Saran Cook, but where's the strategic plan? Where's the transparency around about the current legal action going on? All that type of stuff. I don't think it solves much, but she's got every right to put it out there. And that's fine. And everyone to celebrate the fact that the returns to owners have increased. I think, the only question I would caution against any governing body from cherry picking stats, and that's, there are some positive stats out there you want to put out there, but you also want to have a really clear view of what the health of your industry is, and also take the temperature of your participants. Maybe it is a minority. Maybe it's a very small minority that aren't happy with what's going on. But whatever they are, they're certainly, they've got power, but they're also quite, noisy. I would think that there's, from where, in my personal view, from where Racing New South Wales describes it as a small minority. I don't think it's a small minority. Is it a majority? I don't know, but it's certainly not a small minority in my thoughts of people and the people that we talk to about these things. But we'll see how that plays out. On the things on the track, Tim, and we'll just a quick nod there to Makybe Diva, who passed away on the weekend, aged 27, I think. Remarkable horse, a horse of a lifetime. We've been so lucky to have so many horses of a lifetime, but, probably you and I growing up in an era where we saw some great horses coming through and she was probably the first horse we thought was, unbeatable over the 3,200 metres at Flemington, which is the place where all, quality horses, in our mind, in Australian histories have been measured. It was extraordinary what she was able to do in those 3 Melbourne Cups, and she carried a nation, didn't she?
Oh, I was at the first 2 Melbourne Cups that she won, and great atmosphere, and she just was a phenomenal horse that raced on, for a few seasons. Probably the Cox Plate win fanning, 8 wide on the turn and coming over the top. That was memorable as well during a great era of Cox Plates, with, on the back of sort of Northerly, one of my favourite horses, and Sunline, of course, before that. So, she sticks in the memory bank, and, great mare. And there's still a few fillies out there to sort of continue the line on. She has thrown, I think, stakes placed horse, and as I said, a couple of fillies to be carried on, and I think those bloodlines will be seen for a bit longer yet.
Yeah, and I think she'll go down as the last, probably the most recent great Melbourne Cup hero. She rewrote that race. I've got a lot of personal memory about that, Tim. I was thinking about Makybe Diva won her final cup in 2005, November 2005, and it's probably about 3 weeks before my father passed away. And it always occurred to me that my dad's lifetime spanned Makybe Diva winning 3 Melbourne Cup, and he was born in 1930. So he also was around for Bartlett's Melbourne Cup. So, when you think about that as a lifetime and its historic events, racing in some ways an eternal. And while Makybe Diva is no longer with us, she has an eternal presence and will always have an eternal presence on the Australian racing landscape. Just quickly rolling up or going through a big week of racing ahead, Tim. We've got Group 1 racing in 2 states this week. We've got 4 Group 1 races. It really is heating up. I did want to have a bit of a look forward to, I guess, the most significant results for the weekend. I would think from a future stallion perspective, and I'll sort of hook that back across our bloodstock thing, because that's a bit of our shtick, isn't it? I would think the Newmarket's probably the most significant race, given, if Centaurus wins the Newmarket, as many expect him to do, it puts him in really rare air. And, but we've also got Angel Capital, Wotan, Peloton, and even Gallant Sun still in the entire as well, who, if they would win this race, would, significantly put their steps forward for stallion credentials moving forward.
Yeah, Centaurus obviously brilliant first up in the Lightning. Look, if he wins, won't devalue him, put it that way, but it probably won't have the same effect as particularly really important race for Angel Capital and Wotan. They need that Group 1 for, Yulong stepped in and paid a lot of money for him, sort of north of 4.4 million, I think, when he looked, obviously he was scratched, I think, before the Australian Guineas, when he looked at I think he was even money favourite, and things haven't gone right. He's got a terrific turn of foot when it all goes to plan. So if he won, it'd be really significant for Yulong. Wotan, that showed a lot of promise all the way through, and again, things haven't quite gone to plan. Interesting, they've kept him sort of to 1,200 metres, and he jumped out well last week, sort of given for a Chris Waller horse, a reasonable hit out, I thought, sort of 8 days before the race. And again, important race. So for Coolmore, who are waiting for that next young stallion to continue that Wooden Bassett line as well.
Yeah, All-Star Mile's a terrific race. There's probably there's no consequence there really from a breeding bloodstock point of view, but it does show you, Tim, that you get the same quality race for $2 million as you get for $5 million. I don't think they would have got a better race with $5 million than they've got on Saturday with, you look at Cuspis has a couple of mares like Treasure of the Moment and Pride of Jenny and those sort of horses, but, they're just it's such a strong, interesting field. Yeah, and I think like the concept where, you need $10 million or $5 million to get a quality field, that's a good example. Probably you don't need that, do you?
No, and it is an intriguing race. I guess we'll find out with, Treasure of the Moment led first up and beaten as favourite, and some say the tempo suited her and she had entitled to win, and others will say Matt Laurie's probably in the corner where, no, I think she's better ridden with a sit, with Pride of Jenny in the race. She won't, I dare say she won't be leading, and she'll get the chance to finish over the top. So we'll find out the answer in the All-Star Mile.
We've also got the Canterbury Stakes, also a really interesting race. Obviously on Saturday in Sydney, we've got the 3-year-olds Baywatch, Napoleonic and Nepotism. We haven't seen Nepotism since the Cox Plate, and he's probably a little bit of a sleeper in terms of the having been a Group 1 winner as a 2-year-old in terms of his value there. But, a horse like Napoleonic as well. Baywatch obviously has got his career at the start probably pretty much sorted out, I would think, given his win in the Golden Rose. But, I think, these Group 1 races do set the scene, especially for these 3-year-old colts, don't they?
Sure, and Baywatch, I think people would, even Godolphin would like to see him just put it all together again. Obviously, he's got enormous talent, but I think he over-raced a bit in the Lightning, or first up anyway. And, if he can just put it all together, he could blow them away again. It's just, I guess the difference between his best and worst is probably bigger than some other horses, but he's got the talent. Yeah, and interesting. We say 10 tries, apparently been ruled out of Royal Ascot, but could Baywatch, if he puts it all together, could he go to the Northern Hemisphere Royal Ascot this year? I'd say, unfortunately, Dubai's almost certainly ruled out given the war at the moment. But, it'd be on the line if he can put it all together and maybe go to a TJ and then maybe overseas.
I've also got the Randwick Guineas, of course, with Autumn Boy, Attica, Rivellino, or Colts looking to sort of, enhance their record across that. But we've also got Filly and Cheese and Alibi. It might be the best 3-year-old middle distance filly in the land. So be a fascinating race, that one. So it's great to have Group 1 racing. Yeah, and we'll look to sort of preview a few of those races throughout Straight Talk over the journey over the autumn. The following segment is brought to you by Inglis. Entries for the 2026 Inglis Weanling Sale Series, Australia's most lucrative weanling sale series, are closing soon. A record $29.4 million was traded between the Australian Weanling Sale and the Great Southern Weanling Sale in 2025. Last year's sale ended with the Inglis again setting a market-leading clearance rate, as well as selling Australia's 2 highest-priced weanlings of the year. The Inglis Weanling Sale Series is the only weanling sale series in Australia that continues to grow. Since 2023, Inglis has grown by nearly 30% in turnover. Recent graduates of the Inglis Weanling Sale Series include the likes of Well-Written, Streisand, Hayasugi, Komochi, Straight Charge, Shiki, Calamari Ring, and many others. The Australian Weanling Sale will be held at Riverside on May 4th to 4 and 5, while the Great Southern Weanling Sale will take place at Oaklands on June 12th. To view Inglis's promotional booklet on the Inglis Weanling Sale Series, go to inglis.com.au. Tim, we'll round off things now with wagering and the National Tote. I think we covered this off a little bit last week. I can't remember if we did or not, actually, but talking about where Tabcorp sits, and I guess Gillon McLaughlin's sort of, stake in the ground. We're going to deliver the National Tote by the end of this financial year, so mid-year. It would be a significant step forward for Tabcorp, but what is interesting, I'd be interested to get your take on this, Tim. What impact do you think, we know the idea, concept behind it, we create more liquidity, more people, more confident betting the market. We've seen Whirlpool last week. I think you and I had a conversation in the pub last week, which you weren't really getting my point of view around about what the impact of the short price favourites on Whirlpool has. But beyond that, what do you think the impact on the corporate bookmakers will be, Tim, in terms of the other rivals? What can you foresee as the challenges, or how will they be seeing the likelihood that will, from July 1 this year, we may well be seeing just one tote across Australia?
Well, it all depends if they can convince or legislate that the corporates have to push that tote money back into the pools, exotics, quaddies and quinellas and trifectas and first fours or whatever. Whether they can convince the corporates, give them a commission on that, convince them to do that is one thing. I'd say that's pivotal. If they don't, and the corporates keep holding on to all that money that's sort of Tabcorp's leaked in the sort of exotic markets and best totes, I don't think it'll change much because they'll just call it something else, a national tote plus 5% or 8% or whatever. It doesn't change. I'm not sure what best tote sort of averages now. Was it 100? I think it come out at 108%,
Yeah.
100 to something like that. So if they go, well, it's, best tote, tote plus 6%, what changes? But I guess it's for the punter, the dogs and trots where there's a few $100s in the pool. I guess it makes a small difference. And I guess for Gill, it'll McLaughlin make him look like he staked his reputation on a little bit and get it over the line and prove that he can get things done in the wagering space, given the government negotiations have to take place to get a deal like that done with all the states.
Yeah, what will probably be interesting is what sort of deal that Tabcorp have or are still doing with Racing New South Wales. obviously a key stakeholder in all this. Gillen and Peter V'landys know each other quite well from their days. Obviously, Peter, significant role within the NRL and obviously Gillen with the AFL over the years. But yeah, obviously what has come out of this, and Racing New South Wales in a relatively strong position to negotiate here, it could result in a better return for the New South Wales industry. We know before that, Peter V'landys, for all his critics, what he has done well is equal a lot more money to wagering. And we go back to before the discussions around prize money, all that sort of stuff. That's all been driven by race fields and that landmark decision, which, again, to his credit, he took on in 2012 or 2011, took them to the court and got the rights to actually, charge them a fee for operating, on their field. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that and what the deal is and how things have worked out, because it became apparent during this week with conversations or with sort of stuff that come out of the New South Wales government that there's no chance that the New South Wales tote deal gets reviewed before 2034 when it's up. So I don't think it's going to see much change there. So if New South Wales Racing in particular got to eke more returns out of Tabcorp deal, they're going to have to do it through these type of negotiations. So we'll see what happens there. Like I said, there is a deadline. Internally, Tabcorp are very confident they'll make it. There's a few things they had to step through. Some of other people in the industry I've spoken to sort of in background have sort of cast doubts whether they may get there or not. But we'll see what happens, and it's an important deadline. The only other one I wanted to touch from a wagering perspective, Tim, and it's probably something we discussed sort of previously on this podcast, is I guess social media influences and wagering and gambling and where things sit. And Liquor and Gaming New South Wales announced this week they're going to be cracking down on that, both from the perspective of the influencers and them getting paid money to promote gambling and betting products, but also from the company's point of view. So this is an interesting one, Tim, because it seems to me like, Liquor and Gaming New South Wales and their remit, they're more likely to be cracking down on companies that are regulated within Australia than those that are outside. And probably the challenge in this market is not necessarily the people that are spruiking, the regulated bookmakers or whatever else. It's those who are spruiking, unregulated overseas casinos and the like that are sort of, able to target Australian customers.
Yeah, well, the invitation's open. Isn't Bren for Benny Scarf to come on this podcast? Have you issued that? I know you're a big fan. Yeah, I guess they want to be seen to be doing something and cracking down, and there is a proliferation of these people and not targeting Benny. He's done whatever the arrangement is, and however he makes it work, he's got a following, and there's a lot of other people that seem that I come across seem to be trying to replicate that, probably not with as much success, but I guess if...
or as much profanity.
Yes. maybe. But there's obviously affiliate sort of schemes there. It's probably like the old, similar to the websites sort of 10, 15 years ago, and Punters and RaceNet were sort of built on that. And now it's sort of social media influencers, and I guess just trying to keep a check on that of who's got what. And, and as we know, there was that influencer that came down sort of to Pakenham, and I think it was the Dogs as well. And, there was a screenshot of having a bet on an Australian illegal wagering company on left-hand advisors and lots of winners. Yeah, stake, yeah. So, yes. Yeah, I guess they're just sort of trying to keep on top of that, which is pretty fast-moving feast.
Yeah, I think 44% of Australians, according to the Responsible Wagering Australia Commission survey, can't tell the difference between a legal and illegal bookmaker, and you can't blame them, Tim. If you can get a hold of those ones, I mean, you should come up with a block and all those type of things. But in social media, it's all very grey as well. So we're a long way from being social media influencers, Tim. So it's probably not an area where overly feel for. But what I will say is that it'd be interesting to see what happens, whether they decide to crack down more on the regulated market and the non-regulated market. I don't know if a company in Curacao getting a nasty email from Liquor and Gaming New South Wales is going to make much difference to the way they decide to do things. But we've seen how important that celebrity model around about promoting these things is to this growth. And we probably have seen it more in the unregulated market than the regulated market. Well, that'll do us for now. Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk, brought to you by Dalian English. Thank you, Tim, for your time as always. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to us on our podcast, and be sure to subscribe. Check out the Straight subscription offering there. We urge you to subscribe to access all our content. Send us an email, editor@straight.com.au. Let us know what you'd like to talk about, any issues, any interviews you might want to see us do, whatever else. And we'll talk to you again next week.